Welcome to the 2023 SEC simulation using Vegas odds and ESPN's FPI. So here is the screenshot of the initial season rankings for this season in the SEC East and West for both sides. As you can see, the projected wins and losses are on the right. These are pretty close to Vegas totals, but a couple teams say Florida, ranked 18, I think is a bit overrated. South Carolina at 42, I think is a little underrated. Obviously, you've got the big outlier there being Vanderbilt. We'll see how all of this plays in. Of course, LSU being number 4 and Bama and Georgia being 2 and 3 will also play into it as well. So let me walk you through how we are going to do this simulation with a simple example from week 1. A game that does not have a spread on it. So in this case, we're going to be using the FPI percentages here. It's South Dakota against Missouri. And as you can see, I'm just going to be going into this random percentage generator. And since it's 96% for Missouri, we're going to take a random percentage. If it's under 96%, so for the favorite, say it's 55. If it's under 55 and the percentage is under 55, then the favorite is going to win that game. So in this case, it is something in the 50s, and Missouri is going to win easily. So now that we have all that out of the way, let's get into it with week 1 and 0, and let's go over the notable upsets. Obviously, I'm not going to have enough time to go over every result here, but let's get into it. And as I said before, popping out with the very start of the video, we've got Florida against Utah. I said Florida was a little overrated. They are around 30%. There are Vegas odds for this game. It's Utah -9. It's a little less than 30% for Florida. I'm using the implied odds from the money line between the two and averaging it. So when there is a Vegas spread available, I'm using that because I think Vegas knows more about these teams than ESPN FPI is. Either way, Florida gets lucky, wins this game, a big week 1 start for them. Then we've got LSU against Florida State, and Florida State's going to win this one, despite LSU being favored by 3 in Vegas. So as you can see, here are the standings after 1 week. The only loss that occurred was that LSU game. Every other team in the SEC won. Vanderbilt won twice in a row as they play on week 0. Then week 2, we've got Middle Tennessee pulling off the upset over Missouri. Again, 9.5% chance. This landed somewhere around 92 or 93% on that random percentage generator. So Middle Tennessee picks up the miracle win after losing to Bama in week 1. Then, so here's the standings after 2 weeks. Only a few teams have a loss. Vanderbilt in there, and then LSU as aforementioned. Then week 3 starts to get a little crazy with these out-of-conference games. Missouri's going to win a slight upset against K-State after getting blown up last year in this game in Manhattan, Kansas. But then Alabama gets off to the wrong foot, losing at South Florida. And just to prove it to you guys, I have the screenshot of the percentage here. It's 99.9%. This is just a crazy roll. We'll see if Bama can still make the playoff from here. But wow, that's just very unlucky. To be fair, I don't really know why the FPI doesn't have this at 1% for USF. Vegas odds would have probably been worse, but given how unlucky that roll was, wouldn't really matter. South Florida would have taken it either way. Not really sure why Bama's going on the road for this one, but we'll have to see what happens. I think this will be like a 40-point spread in Vegas when the game actually happens. So as you can see, the standings are quite mixed around here, but let's get into week 4 where we get the start of the conference slate. The Razorbacks are going to take one as very heavy underdogs at LSU here, but they get lucky on the roll. And as you can see, let's go over our leaders here. There are just 4 undefeated teams. One's Arkansas, one's Texas A&M in the West. They're in the driver's seat. And then you've got Georgia and Tennessee. Oh, and Kentucky there in the East. So a lot's going to happen. Let's give you these week 5 results here. Almost all road teams are going to win here. Texas A&M is going to beat Arkansas to end their undefeated season. Georgia wins easy. Alabama, Florida, South Carolina is going to lose at Tennessee. So pretty chalk here. That's why I'm not really going into the individual results. Then we've got the big game, Alabama at Texas A&M the next week. Bama -7.5. They're heavy favorites here, but Texas A&M gets lucky in the dice roll, and Alabama already has 2 losses. This is not looking good for them. Then I'll also show you a slight upset for the Razorbacks getting off to a hot start here, even though this FPI percentages do not favor them at all, getting the win at Ole Miss. So as you can see in the SEC, Texas A&M is going to have the driver's seat in the West with an undefeated conference record. Ole Miss and Mississippi State off to that 0-3 start, pretty brutal. And then in the East, Vanderbilt 0-3, pretty expected. And then Tennessee and Georgia undefeated as well over there. Next week, we've got Arkansas at Alabama, Missouri at Kentucky. None of these results are particularly interesting, but Texas A&M does lose at Tennessee. That's pretty expected, but it does give them a blemish in that SEC West competition. Then next week, Tennessee at Bama. Tennessee gets a very lucky roll, being 10-point underdogs, and Bama gets unlucky again. You really can't describe this. If you're a Bama fan, wow, this is just unfortunate. This is a permutation of how the season could go, so this would just be devastating. They're definitely out of the playoff now with 3 losses. They were probably out with 2 after that South Florida loss. Let's take a look at the standings. LSU is up there in the driver's seat. TAMU also has 1 loss, but LSU is number 1 for now with that 6-2 record, despite losing to FSU out of conference. Georgia and Tennessee are setting up a great showdown in the second to last week, both 7-0. Florida 6-1, which I think is plenty overrated for them. They're due for a couple losses here. And then Vanderbilt and Auburn in the cellar in their respective divisions. Then the next week, not too many notable games. Tennessee loses at Kentucky, though, so that brings them out of the tie for first with Georgia. They will now have to win out and pretty much win head-to-head against Georgia to make that SEC title game. Georgia wins the world's biggest cocktail party in that one. Then the next week, LSU loses a critical match at Bama, which means that Texas A&M is back into the driver's seat. But Texas A&M loses to Ole Miss, so both of them stay put in the West. And let's take a look at those standings. Bama is back into a tie for first in terms of the conference record. Texas A&M has the best record overall because LSU lost that game against FSU. Texas A&M and LSU, of course, play in the last week of the season. That one could have big ramifications. As for the East, Georgia 9-0, Tennessee 8-1. As I mentioned, they'll pretty much have to win out. Florida's dropped a couple in a row to fall to 6-3. And elsewhere down the division, it just gets worse and worse. Take a look at that 3-way tie, though, for fourth. Arkansas, Mississippi State, and Ole Miss. Can any of those teams make a run and try and grab that SEC West title? I don't think so, just because they all don't have the tiebreakers. So let's see what happens in the next week, where Auburn is going to get a shocking win at Arkansas. But again, most of those teams are in the cellar. Florida is going to win at LSU, get very lucky in that one. Alabama is going to win at Kentucky, Tennessee at Missouri, and then just the other matchups are pretty notable in that, Vanderbilt just hasn't won a game since that 2-0 start, and it is the second to last week of the season. We got that long-awaited Georgia-Tennessee showdown, and Tennessee getting super lucky here. Another +8 spread here against Georgia at Neyland, but they're going to win it and possibly clinch their berth into the SEC title game. This is just an insane simulation so far. I could see this happening in real life, but my goodness, it would be unlikely. And then another game out of conference. You got some of these bye games for every team in the West in the second to last week of the season. Southern Miss beats Mississippi State. There have been a couple upsets, that Middle Tennessee one, the South Florida, and now Southern Miss. In the bye game, someone's on the hot seat if this happens in real life here. So let's take a look at those standings. Mississippi State in a bowl. Now every team in the SEC West is in a bowl going into the final week. Kentucky needs to win a game to get into a bowl, and Vanderbilt's just way out. 0-7 in conference, my goodness. Tennessee 10-1 overall, but 6-1 in conference. They need to win that last game against Vanderbilt. I think they will, but let's see what happens. And in the Egg Bowl, Ole Miss takes that one. Missouri loses in that border showdown against Arkansas. Alabama wins the Iron Bowl. Texas A&M falls to LSU, which is big for the SEC title ramifications. And now Alabama's going to win it because Texas A&M could have made it if they won, but LSU did not have a chance due to those late season losses. Vanderbilt's going to lose to Tennessee, so it will be a Bama-Tennessee rematch in the SEC championship. Florida State beats Florida, going 2-0 in this simulation as the out-of-conference team. Georgia's going to easily beat Georgia Tech. Kentucky beats Louisville in that Kentucky showdown, and then Clemson beats South Carolina on the road. So these are the final standings before the SEC title game. As you can see, Alabama just a solid 6-2 in conference, and Tennessee wins that tiebreaker over Georgia officially now. So in the SEC championship, I'd say that Alabama has about an 80% chance given how Vegas was pricing the spreads for the game at home for Tennessee against Georgia, and then on the road against Bama. I think Bama has about an 80% chance to win, and the random percentage is below 80, so Bama takes it. And this is a very interesting scenario here because you've got a 3-loss SEC champion. Alabama's avenged one of their losses, but I don't see them making it with 3 losses at all. Tennessee now has 2 losses, and they're not a champion. They're out, as you saw with USC last year. And then Georgia sitting there with 1 loss, but really, who have they beat? Their out-of-conference games were not very good, and they lost their only game to Tennessee. So if you call an 8-4 Florida ranked, yeah, sure, that's a pretty good one. An 8-4 Ole Miss, that's a couple of ranked games, but is that enough to get a 1-loss non-conference champ in? I think it probably will be, considering that Tennessee game would have been close, but let me know in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and let me know if you want me to do more of these college football 2023 simulations in the future.